Good afternoon. My name is Mike Dahlinger, and I am Administrator of School Partnerships at Michigan Virtual. I'm here with Tammy Jackson from MASSP, and we'd like to talk to you for a few minutes just on some of the things we've been hearing out in the field, talking with principals and teachers about how this year has gone. Since the pandemic, we're still in it, but as it's moving forward, what we're hearing in the field is behavior is a lot worse than last year or the previous year, 2 years ago. There's really a lack of social growth and maturity with our students. There's been articles published that state, if your kids are acting like fourth graders when they should be in middle school and sixth grade, or your ninth graders are acting like middle schoolers, it's true. They're about 2 years behind in that social growth and maturity. And that's having a hard time for teachers to be able to focus on content when they're constantly dealing with student issues. Tammy and I have over 50 years experience in public education, mostly as administrators. So we'd like to take a few moments and spend some time and, kind of figure out, hey, what are some possibilities that you can do in your classroom or in your building to make the second semester go a lot better? So Tammy, tell me what you are hearing in the field.
Mike, I'm hearing the same thing. Specifically, what I'm hearing is that students' attention spans are short and teachers are having huge issues with the use of cell phones. When you think about it, students had all this autonomy when they were learning in a distance format, and they could check their phones whenever they wanted to. They could be on their phones. They could walk away from their screens. And they've taken those bad habits and they've actually brought those bad habits into the classroom. And it's really been a struggle for teachers.
Can you tell me what the best way to determine what is working and what isn't working in the classroom?
Honestly, I'm a firm believer that you have to ask the students. You see, one of the hard facts about classroom management is it's not about changing student behavior, it's about changing teacher behavior. And teachers don't like to hear that because they think it means that they're doing something wrong. When in fact, what they're doing is they're just not keeping up with the pace of what students are bringing to the classroom. And so it's when they change their behavior to adapt to what's going on in the classroom is when you start to get things under control. So I just firmly believe that you have to ask students what's going well and what isn't going well, and let them tell you what needs to change in order for them to be able to pay attention. So for example, we're having a huge issue with cell phones right now. What are we going to do about these cell phones? Because we can't have you on cell phones when you're supposed to be learning. And you would be surprised at what they will offer up for you. They will come up with better solutions than you could ever come up with. You should also talk to students about classroom procedures, what works and what doesn't work. In your mind, you think one thing works or it always did work in the past, and you just stick with it. But if it's not currently working, let's say to students, listen, it doesn't appear to be working when I asked you to do this, so how could we fix this problem as a class? The same thing with instruction. Students are not used to sitting still listening to a teacher speak for long periods of time. That's not the way you learn in distance learning. And so we've got to adapt what we're doing in the classroom to accommodate really the habits that they have formed. And it's the way of the future. This is not going to go away. Remote learning is going to be here to stay in some fashion or another. So we have to look at our instructional delivery and involving students in, what do you like? What do you need from me? And when you ask students these questions, they'll give you great suggestions on how to make the classroom more conducive for their learning.
Okay. What are some common engagement activities?
Well, one of the things you have to do to engage students to start out with is you have to be able to work within an attention span that is conducive to them. So I really encourage teachers to give students brain breaks. And what I mean by that is you have short periods of time when you deliver instruction, and then you have a break in that so that the brain can sort of switch and reset. And there's all kinds of things that you can do to give brain breaks. Some of them are simply, you've got 60 seconds and you show a timer and they just get to let their brain go wherever it needs to go, and then you pull them back together. And I know that breaks in instruction always seem scary because when you do that, it's hard to get kids back. But if you teach that protocol and you use it, it really does work. The other thing that I encourage teachers to do is to have a posted agenda. And I mean a posted agenda, maybe even with time, breaking the day down or the class period down in brief periods. So I know when I go to a meeting or a training, I know I love when I see what time we're going to take our break, or what time lunch is, or what time we're going to do certain things, because it just helps me, oh, okay, I can stay focused for this amount of time because I know at this time we're going to switch and do that. I actually saw an example of this just yesterday where the teacher actually had an agenda by time printed, and there was probably 15 different times listed for just one class period. So it really showed students, for 2 minutes we're going to do this, then for 4 minutes we're going to do this. And it helped keep the teacher on pace, but it helped students understand what was coming next. So once you have those protocols in place, then you can start dipping into those different kinds of engagement activities. So if you think about it, students aren't used to, again, as I said, sitting there and listening. They need to be involved with something, doing something with their hands, doing something different with their brain. So things like type a question you might have in a Google Doc, which helps the rest of the class see what's going on or what questions are being asked, and it sort of gives the students a time to actually think for themselves about what questions they might have. There's all kinds of other different engagement activities, and way too many to talk about in this short period of time, but I encourage staff to do just a little bit of their own research and find out what are some of the engagement activities that you can use in your classroom to keep students engaged in what's going on.
Nice. How do you manage that student who is frequently disruptive in class?
You know, I have found, and I have found that my teachers realize that when teachers sort of make it, the disruptions seem as a disruption to them personally, that means a little bit more to students. So what I mean by that is teachers need to use I statements. And when we say I statements, we tell a student how their behavior is affecting us. And that means something different to students, because students really don't always see it that way when they disrupt. They don't see that, hey, my teacher spent a lot of time putting this lesson together, and when I disrupt, they get off track. Or when I'm disruptive, the students aren't learning. So just simple things like, when you cause these disruptions, it worries me because I know the other students aren't getting what they need. I statements are a huge part of the language we use in restorative practices. And teachers have told me over and over again that while they didn't see that it would, it really did make a change. And the biggest thing is, you've got to have private conversations with students. You cannot speak with disruptive students in front of their peers. It'll never work. You have to find a time when you can pull that student aside and speak with them one-on-one. And I don't necessarily mean meet me in the hallway, although that's better than speaking to them in front of the class. Really, the best thing to do is during your prep time, go pull that student that's constantly causing disruptions and sit down with them one-on-one and say, this is what's happening when you are disruptive in my class. What can I do to help you be less disruptive? Because I can't have you being disruptive in my class. And they will appreciate that private conversation, and they're way more likely to change their disruptive behavior.
Nice.
Like, what kind of training does Michigan Virtual have to help struggling teachers?
Well, I'm glad you brought up restorative justice and restorative practices, because, Michigan Virtual does have 2 courses in restorative practice and understanding human behavior through restorative justice. These courses really give a practical tips to improve future interactions with students, and by allowing you to understand their behavior. It helps you analyze, measure, and improve the adult-teacher-student relationships and understand the psychological, emotional, and physical needs that are happening with the students.
I couldn't agree more with that. I look at restorative practices as something that works for an entire system, an entire school building, or even an entire district. But what does Michigan Virtual have as far as resources for specific teachers or even administrators who are supporting struggling teachers to help with classroom management?
Sure. We have a couple longer classes in classroom management. One is called Solving Classroom Discipline Problems 1 and 2, which really focuses on plans and strategies that work for today's students, much like what you talked about using I statements, much like you talked about how do we handle students that are consistently used to doing things over the last 2 years the way they wanted to do it. If they wanted to get up and leave, they could get up and leave. If they wanted to do their learning when they were at 2 o'clock instead of 9 o'clock, they could. We have another course called Understanding Adolescents and Their Behaviors. Again, it just has great practical tips for the classroom. As an administrator, you could assign these to your teachers, or as you go through those evaluations and say, you know what, this teacher could use some help. Maybe I'll give them this course to take. It also allows teachers to take ownership and say, you know what, I think I need some help in the classroom management or understanding adolescents and their behaviors. And they can go ahead and take these courses on their own.
I really like that, because one of the things that I just don't agree with is when an administrator brings in a professional development for an entire staff on a topic that some of the staff doesn't need any improvement on. Well, maybe they could improve, but they certainly don't need formal training on. And there's nothing more discouraging to that teacher who's doing a good job in the classroom than to have to sit through a full day of classroom management training. So I like that you offer those individually. How long are those courses?
Absolutely. And I think you got a great point there. 25 years as an administrator, I put my teachers through a lot of professional development, and I would say some of it wasn't good. There were classes, sessions that I did that not everybody needed. There was the new teacher that might need some classroom management help, and then there was that veteran teacher who had great relationships with kids, had no problems, but they had to do that. So some of these courses, the first two that I talked about, they're 3 to 5 sketchies. Teachers could be able to complete them in an afternoon of PD, especially if you have flexible PD. You put this in there and say, hey, you know what, in your classroom, I'd like you to do this, for the next 3 hours, and they could knock it out. The second two courses, the one on solving classroom discipline problems 1 and 2 and understanding adolescents and their behavior, those are a bit longer, about 24 hours in length. But again, teachers can earn those sketchies, and they need those to make sure they keep their professional certificate going.
Mike, you and I have often talked about how much we've learned about being a principal since we haven't been a principal. When we've been able to sort of look down at the practice from a higher level, and of course have more time to do research and to plan. And I would agree with you. I offered some professional development that I would never offer again, or offered in the way that I did. And that's what I love about Michigan Virtual. If I were in a building today, I would be having my professional development be prescriptive. And just as students are learning distance-wise, teachers can do the same thing with their professional learning. I think that's an amazing idea.
Absolutely.
So everyone's talking about social emotional learning, or SEL. How do we wrap our heads around what that really is, or what that training is all about?
That's great. It's a great buzzword, and I shouldn't even call it a buzzword because it's so much more than that. SEL, or social emotional learning in education right now. Can teachers really explain it? Can teachers really explain it? And can they implement it if asked? I can tell you, when I became an administrator in 1995, and if you told me, hey, we need to work on SEL, I would have no clue what that was. But I'm telling you, at Michigan Virtual, we provide a free series of courses around SEL. It's 5 courses, and it gives you a great understanding of what social emotional learning is. And studies have shown that an evidence-based SEL program can lead to improved academic performance and student behavior, and yield an average of, get this, a return on investment of 11 to 1.
I believe that. We know our students have experienced so much trauma as a result of the pandemic, and I know our students need that social emotional learning and that support. But besides in the classroom by the teacher, how else have you seen the curriculum delivered?
Yeah, teachers nowadays have a lot on their plates, and there's no doubt about that. And so how do I throw one more thing in there? Well, most frequently, the SEL program is done in the homeroom, maybe in health, maybe your first hour, et cetera. And it can be pushed out to students also, and again, parents through emails. The issue with email is, there's no definitive way to make sure the students are completing it. But I'm telling you, Michigan Virtual has a free course to address what social emotional needs are. There are teachers that are going to say, I didn't go to school to learn what social and emotional learning is. I don't know how to create lesson plans. I don't know how to do that. I'm going to tell you, as a former principal, at the very least, I would have all my staff take the course, Social Emotional Learning, an Introduction SEL at Michigan Virtual. In this course, you define what social emotional learning is. You understand ways in which social emotional learning can increase the student's capacity to learn. It really provides a solid overview to social emotional learning. And it helps you understand what it is and how it affects the students. I like to think of, social emotional learning is all the stuff that students need to be successful that's not in the curriculum. And there's so much, back in the day, it was called soft skills. What soft skills do people have? Well, you know what? How does that come across? And we need to train our teachers and all our staff what social and emotional learning is. Then after that introductory course, if you want to continue on, then staff can move on to other free courses. Remember, these are free, about embedding SEL in the school, trauma-informed support, and others. Again, all of which I feel schools need to know and need to have a great basic understanding of how social and emotional learning can affect the student.
Mike, I actually took that introductory course myself because I caught myself talking a lot about social emotional learning and not really knowing if I fully understood what it meant. And so I actually took that course, and it really cemented what I believed social emotional learning was, and it just really helped me understand it a lot better. So even though I'm not in a school and I'm not in a classroom, it really helped me to just take that course. The problem is teachers right now are saying they don't have time to take courses because they have too much on their plate now. So what else is there for them to do if they feel like they can't sit down and take a long course?
That's a great question. I can tell you at the very least, I would take the social emotional course. If I couldn't do that, look at the blog series by Lauren Kazee, Parenting During a Crisis. I'll put a link to it, but at the very least, read the article, Your Brain in Crisis, Why is it so hard to learn during a difficult time? This really provides practical tips to help students, like you said before, providing choice and those type of things. It's a simple article to read. Again, Your Brain in Crisis. Why is it so hard to learn during a difficult time? Because our kids are in crisis.
They are, that's for sure. And I have some resources too, Mike, about trauma-informed instruction and students in crisis. And I have one particular ed talk that I watched, which cleared things up for me immensely. And I'll make sure that I provide that for our resource list that we're going to provide anybody who is interested in getting that from us.
Perfect.
So we know what teachers can do individually, but what can be implemented at the school level that helps staff and students?
Well, with support from the state of Michigan, the most comprehensive mental health and prevention education program on social and emotional learning is now available to schools at no cost. Michigan Cares program. From Michigan Virtual, we were funded through the state of Michigan to help learn how to set and achieve goals to make reasonable decisions. Michigan Cares guides students to turn their struggles into strategies. When asked what would help students, educators often note the need for life skills like making responsible decisions in the classroom, feeling and showing empathy to others, and developing a healthy coping techniques. And we all need to cope now. But this program can be implemented in the whole school. And again, I want to emphasize it does not cost anything. And everything can be found at our website, michiganvirtual.org. We will provide the links to all this information again at the end, what Tammy has talked about and what I have talked about.
I'm so glad that you are emphasizing that free, because I can tell you that when I first started working with Michigan Virtual lots and lots of years ago, when I was in the role of a building administrator, there wasn't much that was free. As a matter of fact, I think Michigan Virtual sort of got the reputation that everything was quite costly. And in fact, what I've learned is that is so not true. There are so many incredible resources that are free or at a really reduced price. So I was shocked to learn that, and I hope that people will at least take the time to look at the materials you have and to discover exactly what they can do for no cost.
Thank you. We are a nonprofit, and we do get state subsidies from the state of Michigan. So we can offer those things for free, and we can put those out there, and we want to do what's best for students. So we have a lot of resources, but I know MASSP has resources too. So what do you have in your organization to help support classroom teachers?
We are currently running a classroom management webinar series. As a matter of fact, I am the trainer for that. We're about 3/4 of the way through that first round. And so we are going to repeat that series second semester. It's very inexpensive. I can't quote the exact price, but I'll include that in my resources. But it's designed for teachers that are having, that want to make improvements in the classroom. We don't ever say they're assigned to this because they're having difficulty. We just say that they want to make improvement. And it's also good for administrators who are supporting struggling teachers. So you can get that information off our website. We also provide in-person restorative practices training for entire districts or entire school buildings. Or maybe if your school is already using restorative practices and you just want to offer it to those new teachers to bring them on board. Mike, regardless of all the resources that are available from MASSP or Michigan Virtual, one of the best pieces of advice I would give teachers who are struggling with classroom management is to observe their peers. We all know who the teachers are that rarely have classroom management issues. We should be observing what they are doing differently than what a person is doing individually to have a classroom where there are rarely difficulties. I encourage that, and you shouldn't let your ego get in the way of that, because classroom management doesn't come naturally to everybody. There are some people who find it easier to make relationships with students that are meaningful and that result in better classroom management. But it can be learned, and one of the ways to do that is relying on your peers, and I really encourage people to do that.
Great. I'm glad you brought up relationships. I know it's cliche, but you know what? Relationships with students, with your administration, with your teachers, teacher to teacher. Build those relationships. Build those relationships with Tammy and myself. That's why we're here. So take advantage of the many resources. Almost all are free and they're available to you, including Tammy and myself. Our time is free to you, so reach out to us. So as we conclude, I want to thank Tammy. And again, we will provide you a link to all the resources we've talked about today, including our contact information. Don't do this alone. Hang in there and have a great second semester. Take care.